post, you mentioned Tim Walz, and you called him what many Americans do find an offensive word, retarded. Do you stand by that claim of calling Tim Walz retarded?
Yeah, I think there's something wrong with him. Absolutely, sure.
You don't think that?
You have a problem with it? You know what? I think there's something wrong with him. Anybody that would do what he did, anybody that would allow those people into his state and pay billions of dollars out to Somalia. We give billions of dollars to Somalia. It's not even a country because it doesn't function like a country. It's got a name, but it doesn't function like a country. Yeah, there's something wrong with Walz.
So we're already seeing the crybaby reactions from Democrats after President Trump announced this week he would be issuing a crackdown on what he's calling third world migration, whether that's terminating temporary protective status for Somalia after widespread fraud issues have now emerged in Minnesota, or banning new immigration from high-risk countries like Afghanistan after what we saw in D.C. this week, and even potentially reviewing millions of legal immigrant applications for fraud, abuse, national security issues, or simple tax dependencies. Here go the Democrats. And it's just so typical, by the way. For instance, we have the situation in Minnesota with Omar Fateh, Ilhan Omar, and Tim Walz himself, where after spending many years from the Somali community referring to themselves as non-American, right? Omar Fateh proudly ran for mayor, calling Somalia his home and our home. We just saw an entire election there decided on the basis of tribal clan warfare. Suddenly they're going to turn around now that deportation is a looming concern and say, we've always been a fabric of this nation. We're proud Americans. It's like you start wearing the American flag the moment ICE shows up at the door. I don't think it exactly works that way, but nonetheless, we'll get into this in a lot more. You have, for instance, Jasmine Crockett trying to deny the reality of potential migrant violence and terrorism, despite literally a National Guard member being killed, another one in critical condition right now in a Washington, D.C. hospital because of it, and a lot more. But folks, I do want to start today's video by just pointing out that in the same week alone, talking about this Afghanistan issue, because it's obviously stirred up a lot of controversy and outrage from the Democrat Party, by pointing out that just days ago, I believe this was yesterday, if not mistaken, I was kind of taking a break for Thanksgiving or whatever, but an Afghan national was arrested on terrorism charges after posting a video claiming he was planning to build a bomb to target the Fort Worth area. So here we go again, where a bunch of people likely brought into this country under Operation Allied Welcome by Joe Biden. Turns out they weren't really screened or vetted all that well, were they? But of course, Trump is the bad guy for saying, hey, maybe we should re-examine if these people should be in the country to begin with. And the Democrats say, no, it's your moral obligation to accept terrorism and have American citizens die of terrorism because you wouldn't want to be a bigot. Don't you know? Haven't you read the bottom of the Statue of Liberty, right? That means terrorist attacks are apparently just a part of life that you have to put up with. Take a listen.
Well, this just in, we have a Fox News alert from Brooke Taylor. You won't believe this. DHS is confirming that an Afghan national was arrested Tuesday after posting a video of himself on TikTok indicating he was building a bomb with an intended target of the Fort Worth area. Mohammed Dawood Al-Okazai is charged at the state level with making a terroristic threat. According to DHS, listen to this. He came to the United States as part of Operation Allies Welcome. So here you have it. This happened Tuesday. Texas Department of Public Safety. This is a second Afghan national, second one this week. Operation Allies Welcome. He had a terror plot. We know it comes the same week that deranged individual, that alleged assassin, took out two of our heroic National Guard, came here on the same program, Operation Allies Welcome, a program that we were assured time and time again by Mayorkas, by Jen Psaki, by Joe Biden himself was safe and secure. But here we have a second data point in 1 week that it was not safe, it was not secure. And we've got to look very hard at this program as President Trump is vowing to make change.
Now, folks, if you enjoy our content, please do us a big favor. Make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. But how much more straightforward could this get? You now just saw 2 terrorist attacks, attempted, foiled, or otherwise, right? In the same week, happening in this country from the same pool of migrants brought under the same program by the Biden administration. And I want you to keep in mind, per capita, we're not really talking about a lot of people, right? I think it was about 100,000 in total out of a country of 330 million plus people. And yet 2 in the same week. It's not the first instance we've seen, by the way. There was a past one that happened in Arlington where some Afghan was trying to shoot the police. But when Trump turns around and says, clearly, the promise that these people would be, quote unquote, properly vetted, which I don't even know what that means, right? It rings very similar to the Syria debate where the Obama administration said properly vetted, as a bunch of Syrian, quote unquote, refugees are committing acts of terrorism all over Western countries. It's like, after all, you bring in people from a high population of jihadis and Islamists and all this. I mean, expect to get what you're going to get, right? Obviously, if you ask them some type of ideological question about, do you love America? Are you a terrorist, right? They're going to vote. They're going to pick the answers you want them to give, but you can't really trust them. And there's no way to run a detailed background check when we're talking about Afghanistan or the Syrian government, are we? But nonetheless, right? Now that Trump is clearly saying, based on common sense, it's not theoretical, okay? Maybe it should have been done before, but that clearly there's a vetting issue here. We need to review this whole program. We need to start cracking down on something here. Then he's the bad guy. Democrats are like, you're being bigoted. You're blaming an entire group of people, which is the excuse you're about to hear, an entire group of people for the acts of a few. Well, actually, we never said that. What we said is that we're going to be reviewing everything. Why are you so scared of that, right? It's the same issue with Doge. Every time we say we're going to crack down on fraud, the Democrats are like, you can't do that. Are you almost saying here, guys, that large populations of diasporas in this country are widely and disproportionately committing fraud or terrorism or whatever it is? Because we didn't say that, right? But when you break down the statistics, for instance, about how close to half of the entire Somali diaspora, which we'll get to in a second here, because that's another point of debate, right? Afghanistan, Somalia, these are the two big ones, where half are receiving some form of government welfare or benefits. And you're seeing very disproportionate cases of fraud indictments coming out of there, coming out of Minnesota and coming from certain neighborhoods in Minnesota, then clearly there is something of an issue. But Tim Walz apparently does not want you to know that, which is why he proceeded to go on Meet the Press this morning and just have a complete and utter meltdown. Take a listen.
Well, here we got a guy on Thanksgiving where we spent time with our families, we ate, we played Yahtzee, we cheered for football or whatever. This guy is apparently in a room ranting about everything else. This is not normal behavior. Look, this is a serious position. It's the most powerful position in the world. And we have someone at midnight throwing around slurs that demonize our children. And at the same time, he's not solving any of the problems. So I'm deeply concerned that he is incapable of doing the job.
Tim, first of all, those labels were not directed at your children. They were directed at you. Secondly, perhaps what you described is actually the problem. If you didn't sit around playing Yahtzee and actually did something or kept an eye on the massive fraud problem in your state, perhaps it would never have gotten to this situation. Although, let's be honest, in any case in history where there's some type of widespread money laundering thing going on, like there is right now in Minnesota. It's not unique. It's not new. A lot of mafias and mobs in the past have done this in places like New York City. It's never the problem that the politicians are simply ignorant or incompetent to actually stop it. Of course, they know what's happening, and likely they're getting kickbacks. I don't know if that's you directly. It's certainly, we actually know it's a provable fact. It's happening all over your state legislature. Many different people are under fire, Omar Fateh included, by the way, for engaging in some of those activities with the shady nonprofits and all of that. So, maybe that's not really the insult you think it is, Tim. Nonetheless, I now want you to hear his excuse for the massive fraud problems that have now emerged in his state, where he's about to say that, he actually has been doing a lot to throw people in jail, but also you have to stop demonizing people, blah, 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 except that you'll find out here in a second, none of what he says is actually true. But take a listen.
Dozens of people of East African descent have been charged, convicted, and sentenced for stealing more than $1 billion in taxpayer money from government programs during COVID. As you know, Governor, that is more than Minnesota spends each year to run its Department of Corrections. So I want to give you a chance to respond to this. Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state?
Well, certainly I take responsibility for putting people in jail. Governors don't get to just talk theoretically. We have to solve problems. And I will note, it's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated, but that attracts criminals. Those people are going to jail. We're doing everything we can. But to demonize an entire community on the actions of a few, it's lazy.
Yeah, well, you hear this quite a bit from Democrats where they selectively try to play the law and order card whenever Trump calls them out on it. And it's like, yeah, Tim, that's completely believable. You know, Minneapolis, Minnesota, totally a place associated with very strong law enforcement. And nothing has gone wrong in that city ever since you became governor, right? Yeah, sure. But as the White House here is even pointing out, Tim Walz cannot take credit for arresting the criminals because he didn't do anything other than let it happen. Why? All of these different fraud cases, and the Feeding Our Futures one that you probably heard about with the 70 plus indictments at this point is not the only one. There's several of them going on because this is a widespread problem in Minneapolis, and it's almost exclusively only coming from individuals in the Somali diaspora, but these are all federal cases, which means Tim Walz stood around and watched. It was federal prosecutors who had to figure that out. And I again here say, that's always how it goes on the local level whenever you have any type of crime syndicate, okay? As I said previously, I'm part Italian, okay? I have family from the Northeast. I don't want to say too much. Doesn't really matter. Those people died a long time ago. But let me just say, and other Italians will attest to this, we all know the same thing, right? People always knew what was going on. You know who were usually their best friends? The mayors, the local commissioners. You know, look at someone, you know, think, who was at the funeral, right? Some people maybe you wouldn't expect if you thought they were up to no good. Yeah, why is that? Because that's how it always goes on the local level, especially when something like money laundering is going on. You don't think there's deals being made with the local politicians? You don't think, by the way, widespread numbers of the community, just normal people in the neighborhood, even if they're not personally money laundering, absolutely know what's going on and everyone's turning a blind eye to it? No, that's how this stuff always goes, okay? It's not new in American history. It's simply going on right now. And then very interestingly, right? You know, I'm not even accusing Tim Walz of being in on it directly here. But when you come to their defense after the scheme you've just done nothing about for many years gets exposed by higher level officials than you, it is a little suspicious, right? It definitely does ring very similar to some of those old stories from the 19 and 1800s out of the Northeast. Let me just say it like that. It's a very similar situation. Political machines, mob bosses, we've seen it time and time again. And secondly, of course, Tim Walz here goes on to point out, you can't demonize an entire community. Well, again, that's not even directly what we're doing. What we're saying is that there's widespread disproportionate problems coming from this community. Tim Walz tries to say that, other people in Minnesota are committing fraud too. Yeah, except 71 of the 75 people currently charged are of Somali descent or East African descent. Which means, sure, yeah, I agree. You probably have some collaborators maybe who are not from the community, but clearly this is a problem going on in the community, which is exactly why we're trying to crack down on that and exactly why you're getting so defensive. By the way, all of this outrage and uproar is over what? Terminating temporary protective status, which doesn't even apply to most of the Somali community in Minnesota. And I've said you probably have to figure out an alternative way to also deal with the other problem. But even on TPS, okay? You're talking about temporary status. It was never supposed to be permanent. Why is that so cruel to say? And then the excuse has been, some of the TPS people already have kids there. They've lived lives here. Okay, why and how could that even be the case? It's called TPS. It's in the name. You have people who have lived here apparently for like 10, 15, 20 years and they never changed their legal status. Clearly, actually, that's obvious proof that the system is being frauded exactly as we're describing. But nonetheless, I want you to take a listen here now to the rally that some Somali activists and community members tried to have in their part of Minnesota, because I find some of the arguments here to be pretty interesting given a lot of what we've already talked about in the past on this channel. But take a listen to what they're now trying to argue.
Families need the relief. We need leaders who will invest in our neighbors, not attack them. The Somali community in Minnesota is a backbone of the state. We contribute to the economy, we serve our communities, we raise families, and we do it with pride. We move to communities in greater Minnesota that have been decimated by the bad practices of the big corporation interest. And big brings small local business, like here today, multi-generational income, and help with restoration. I am saying this to say, we are greater than fear, and to my Somali community, iskasha tomakufto, which means when people stand together, They do not fall.
Oh, really? You're contributing to the economy, you say? Well, I'm sure in some anecdotal cases that is true. But when you're talking, again, about a situation where close to 50% of Somali and Afghan households in the United States are reliant on government benefits, by definition, you are a tax negative, not a tax positive. Which means not only are you not contributing to the economy, you're dragging down the financial situation of the United States. But of course, they say further, well, we start small businesses. Oh, really? You revitalize Minnesota, they said. Really? Where's the revitalization then? And small businesses for who or for what exactly? You're talking about things maybe that you do amongst each other, but then don't even put that money back into the rest of the U.S. economy because such a huge portion of it is going to remittances that are sent out of the country to terrorist groups like Al-Shabaab, something that's already been well established. Yeah, amazing economic contribution there. Or are you talking about starting small businesses like the nonprofit Feeding Our Futures, a little bit of money laundering, a little bit of stealing billions of dollars from taxpayers. But other than that, right, there are wonderful small businesses here going on. Yeah. But you might turn around and say, oh, but Vince, what they're saying is that you can't demonize everyone for the actions of a few. Okay. But what did Trump go out and announce? First of all, he's terminating TPS. As I said, that is temporary. He's in his full right to do that. There's no current official civil war still going on in Somalia. What exactly are they even seeking asylum from? I don't understand that. And by the way, as we're about to be told here, right? Somalia is such a wonderful place. So is Afghanistan. America's so backwards and evil. Okay, then you love Somalia so much. I don't see the problem. Okay, but he's doing that. And secondly, another big point of contention, of controversy, was he wants to deport people who are immigrants to this country, legal or illegal, who are tax dependent, tax negatives, which first of all is against several U.S. existing laws, but they find loopholes to do it, and also just doesn't make any basic common sense. Okay, well, if you're contributing to the economy, if you're running small businesses and you're not using them to money launder, I again say, what exactly are you so afraid of? It's almost like they kind of, again, all sort of know what's going on here. They just don't want to say it, and they're going to assume that the American populace is too ignorant to figure that out. You know what I'm saying? But of course, here you have a further reaction from Wajahat Ali, a very annoying, Islamist, leftist, whatever he is, on social media, going on here to say, if you do deport us, talking here about, Somali, Afghan, the different migrant populations that currently are under review from the Trump administration, and I quote, the U.S. will become a blank hole.
So we're not going away, and if we do get sent away, literally your shithole country will become the United States of America. It will sink.
Oh, really? Is that so? So according to Wajahat Ali, apparently prior to 1990, the U.S. was completely backwater and undeveloped. There was no running water, no electricity. They hadn't even invented the wheel yet. And then in 1990, the magical Wakandans decided to show up on a refugee boat and suddenly just built everything, apparently, right? I didn't want to go there, but that's apparently American history, according to Wajahat Ali and all these people. Minnesota, what a terrible, awful place before Ilhan Omar and her family decided to show up and build everything. Doesn't it look so amazing now? I know, right, guys? And of course, secondly, we can pose this theory by also looking at those countries and simply saying, okay, so if that's the case, and if the people here in question know how to build everything, and they're the only reason America's afloat at all, and, Omar Fateh, for instance, calls Somalia his home, many people do, then why exactly, or what exactly, I should say, is the problem with going back and building all those countries? Huh? How come Somalia doesn't look like Wakanda then, Again, America absolutely needs this community to thrive. Okay, so where's the thriving happening in Somalia or Afghanistan? It really is basic common sense, but, it's just the gaslighting that's typically, of course, happening here. And I again say, this is all in reaction, okay, to us saying we don't want widespread fraud, terrorism, or tribal warfare deciding elections in our country, of course. Now, Jasmine Crockett also went on MSNBC, now I guess MS Now, trying to make the excuse about, again, deporting an Afghan population that clearly had massive problems with vetting and simply reviewing all of that, making the excuse that actually you shouldn't be worried about Islamic terrorism in this country because according to her, white supremacists overall, they committing more crime. All right.
Because if that's the case, let's talk about the white supremacists and how many of them need to be kicked out of this country, because I can guarantee you I can track down more crimes that they've committed, because overall immigrants have a lower crime committal rate than white supremacists. But we don't want to talk about that in this country.
Really? That's the argument now? After 2 acts of terrorism coming from the same pool of the same migrants allowed in by Democrats, they're saying you shouldn't care or even fear for your safety because don't you know people who are not migrants also commit crime? To which I first of all say, the statistic she brings up does not even make any sense. I don't even know if you noticed that. But comparing what she calls white supremacists who commit crime to immigrants is an apples to oranges comparison, right? The accurate side by side would be citizen versus non-citizen or immigrant versus native born, right? There are not that many white supremacists, like genuine organized ones, like legal labeled by the government or whatever, right? In the United States of America. I know she thinks there are, but there are not. So what are you even talking about? Is she trying to say that white people, is that what she's trying to get at? That white people commit more crimes than immigrants? Because that's also not even true, okay? Most of the citizen native born crime in America, let me just say, is coming from a certain place. And it's not predominantly white people per capita or at the ratio, right, that are committing that type of crime. But then lastly here, I would further point out that it doesn't even freaking matter. The whole argument that, oh, non-migrants also commit crime, therefore it's not an issue when migrants or immigrants or foreigners, whatever, come to this country and commit crime, is ridiculous and stupid. Because we never denied that people born in this country also do bad stuff. The entire point is that every single time you have a refugee, an illegal alien, or even a legal immigrant who's brought into this country and commits crime, you could easily say that entire thing was preventable because you could have just not brought that person in to begin with. Now, sure, no matter what system you have, someone's going to fall through the cracks. I understand that. But when there's a widespread, obvious problem of vetting that happened with this Afghan resettlement program, and we just have like genuinely a bunch of Islamic and Afghan terrorists now running around the country doing all this stuff, clearly there's a systemic problem there, right? And saying just because, for instance, a lot of people in Jasmine Crockett's district are also committing crime, therefore we shouldn't care, is ridiculous. Because one is completely preventable. You could just not have the problem in this country to begin with. And in saying that, I'm also kind of, I guess, responding to an argument that we heard a lot years ago that basically went along the lines of illegal aliens commit crime at a lower rate than native-born citizens, therefore stop demonizing the illegals. It's like, first of all, illegals have all committed crimes because they came into this country or they're in this country illegally. But regardless, I again say the rate there should be 0 because every time that you use someone, right, you allow someone to immigrate into this country and they commit a crime, no matter what type of crime, and they raise your overall crime rate, that is a mistake of the immigration system. Someone's born here, they're a citizen, sure. That happens in every country. All countries have criminals, we understand that. But why would we set up an immigration system to harm our country and add to our crime problem instead of do the opposite, right? They keep making the argument here that, oh, well, the people coming over to this country are better than the Native Americans and they, are contributing and building the country, and then they simultaneously turn around and defend the crime. It doesn't make any sense. But I'd lastly even like to point out that statistic I think she's trying to bring up is actually not true or not accurate, right? Again, you heard this a lot. These studies that said, oh, well, the illegals are committing less crime. You know why that is? You know how they came up with that statistic to basically weaponize against conservatives? They used incarceration rates, not rates of conviction, right? At which you say, okay, this person committed a crime, it's in the database, incarceration rates. And essentially, when in doing so, they found out that, well, illegal aliens are actually incarcerated at lower rates than native-born Americans. Well, why might that be the case? It's of course the case because many times, the exception there probably being the Biden administration, that illegal aliens get arrested for a crime, they are, guess what, deported, which means they are not kept in long-term incarceration. Hence, they basically went to the jails and said, okay, we could find there's not that many illegals here, then what's the problem, right? But actually, of course, when you don't use incarceration rates as a proxy for crime, which would artificially lower immigrant and, non-native born figures, and instead use conviction rates. For instance, in states like Arizona and Texas, they ran the same thing and found actually illegal aliens are committing crime at higher rates than the native born Americans. So we'd just like to point that out as well. But yeah, there you have it, guys. As usual, Democrats are calling us the bad guys for not wanting mass crime and terrorism within our country. But they definitely are not in on it. You know, it's not one big scheme for sure. Yeah, totally. Let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.